A muffled woman's voice bid him enter. He looked at Darlington. "Wait," he said before entering the room, and left the doors slightly ajar. Darlington sighed impatiently and glanced at his pocket watch again. "Here now, darling," he heard a feminine voice say. "Tell me, how do you like this?" A male voice answered. Darlington jerked his gaze to the pair of drawers and stared in disbelief. "And this?" she asked with a bit of a chuckle. "Do you like it?" The response, from what the Duke could gather, was a sigh of pleasure. "Ah, but wait, for you've not lived until you've—" "Caller," Butler said. "Not now, Kate," the male voice objected. "Please, you leave me with such a hunger for more." "Digby, keep your hands away." There was a slight pause, and then the woman said, "Oh, it's him. Please show him in, Aldous." Darlington started when Butler pulled the doors wide open. He quickly glanced down, his sense of propriety making him avert his gaze from whatever lewd act he was sure he was interrupting. "Your Grace?" Darlington looked up. Whatever he might have expected, it was not the sight that greeted him. Yes, the room looked a bit like a French boudoir, with peach-coloured walls, silken draperies, and overstuffed furnishings, upholstered in floral chintz. There were gazettes, hats, and a cloak carelessly draped over a chair, but the woman inside was not lying on a daybed with a man on top of her, as he'd suspected. He was surprised to see her standing at a table piled high with pastries and sweetmeats. Moreover, there were Christmas boughs and hollies adorning the walls and the mantel. A dozen candles lit the room, and a fire was blazing in the hearth. Her male companion, a portly fellow with thinning hair, who easily weighed 13 or 14 stone, held nothing more lurid than a teacup. The sugary remnants of a pastry dusted his upper lip. Darlington was stunned, first and foremost because he had supposed something entirely different was occurring in this room, but perhaps even more so because the woman, Miss Catherine Bergeron, was breathtaking. Darlington had known this woman was unusually beautiful. He'd heard it from more than one quarter, and he'd seen it with his own eyes not 2 nights past at the King's Opera House, when he'd attended the first London performance of Mozart's La Clemenza di Tito, at the behest of his friend George, the Prince of Wales. He'd sat with George in the royal box, and it was George who had pointed out Catherine Bergeron. Seated 2 boxes away, she was in the company of Mr. Courtesan, a Frenchman who had made a respectable fortune selling luxurious fabrics to wealthy London society. Miss Bergeron was infamously his model and his mistress. As Darlington observed her that evening, she'd leaned slightly forward in her seat, enraptured by the music. She'd worn a white silk gown trimmed in pink velvet that seemed to shimmer in the low light of the opera house. Pearls had dripped from her ears, her wrists, and more notably her throat. Her hair, pale blonde, was bound up with yet another string of pearls. She did not wear a plume, as so many ladies seemed to prefer, but instead allowed wisps of curls to drape the nape of her long, slender neck. She turned her head slightly and discovered him observing her. She did not glance away shyly, but calmly returned his gaze a long moment before turning her attention to the stage once more. Darlington had found her boldness mildly interesting. Nevertheless, he had not anticipated seeing her again until George had summoned him. Now he was standing in her private salon. But she looked nothing like she had the night at the opera. She was beautiful, astonishingly so, but now, free of cosmetic, her beauty was simpler and natural. She wore a rather plain blue gown, an apron, and a shawl wrapped demurely around her shoulders. Her hair was not dressed, but hung long and full down her back. "Your Grace," she said again, smiling warmly. She picked up a plate of muffins. "May I entice you with a Christmas treat? I just made them," she added proudly. "They are divine, Your Grace," the portly man said, coming to his feet and bowing his head. "No," Darlington said incredulously. Did they think he'd come for tea?